Ben, we'll start with yourself. What are the most common misconceptions about PPC, and how do they impact campaign outcomes?
Cool. Yeah, one misconception from a smart bidding and AI campaign perspective, like Performance Max, is the set and forget mindset, which seems to be scarily quite common in the industry. Assuming you're setting a budget and a target ROAS is enough to guarantee results. In reality, PPC still requires constant optimization from A/B testing and keyword refinement. I've audited countless accounts where fundamental optimizations were completely overlooked, and we feel that providing hands-on management is still a key to success, really. Having optimized PPC campaigns like that, like I said, for over a decade, I come from an era where every element down to CPC bids were manually controlled, and we feel that hands-on sort of foundation is ingrained in ourselves. So the set and forget mindset itself of today sort of gives us chills. We believe that real success still comes from daily, weekly optimization, deep data analysis, and finding that edge that potentially AI can't. So it's a combination of levering the two. Another common misconception, often pushed by industry reps and our good friend sort of OptiScore on the recommendations tab within Google, is that higher budgets always lead to better results. While more spend can drive more traffic, the real question is that traffic quality? I found that success comes from a combination of smart strategy, precise targeting, and ongoing optimization over time. If you follow this mindset and incrementally increase your budgets, so not to disrupt any learning windows and algorithms, you're more likely to achieve more efficient results over time. And then finally, one of the biggest misconceptions about PPC is that it's not only useful for instant results. In reality, PPC can drive impact at every stage of the funnel, especially when you use a strategic mix of search, shopping, social, and display advertising. We need to remember that these channels work together, influence each other to create long-term success, and that focusing only on bottom of the funnel conversions would lead to missing valuable opportunities to build brand visibility and attract new customers. So that's why we tend to recommend a full funnel omni-channel approach across all of our clients there.
Perfect. Thank you, Ben. Abby, on to yourself. What's the biggest myth about PPC that you think holds brands back from achieving success?
Yeah, I think it builds on something that Ben was just saying around kind of budgets. One of the biggest myths for me is that you have to have a huge budget to be successful in PPC. Well, this is definitely not the case. I think smaller businesses in particular might shy away from it as they feel they don't have enough budget to support it and kind of do it successfully. But people often think, the highest bid wins the auction, whereas there's a lot more that goes into it. It couldn't be further from the truth. We need to be not just throwing loads of budget at it. We need to be looking at our ad strength, relevance, quality score. There's so much more that you can be doing to make your activity more efficient. And focusing solely on the highest bid can actually lead to inflated CPCs and kind of more inefficient performance, I think. Focusing on that rounded approach, if you want the best performance, I think you can be successful in PPC in loads of other ways than just kind of throwing a load of money at it.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that because my wife is an osteopath. She's got a little clinic close to where we live, and she spends relatively low budget on kind of PPC, but we've definitely seen the effects over the last few years that she's been doing it. So I can definitely relate to that. Anna, why do some brands believe they can manage PPC without external expertise, and what's the reality?
I think there's a couple of different reasons why people in-house think that they can kind of do it without external expertise. I think one of the main ones is like cost savings. So they probably think it's cheaper to have someone in-house than to hire like an agency or a freelancer. The platform itself is quite accessible, so it's not like you need masses of information to kind of get started. So I think that is also another kind of reason. The fact that Google tries to kind of give the idea that it's very simple to set up campaigns, which it is. But obviously, as we've kind of been discussing already, I think there's a lot more to it than just kind of setting a campaign live and kind of letting Google do the rest. And I guess as well, some brands like to retain like control and transparency of their own budgets and their own kind of marketing goals. So I think it does kind of make sense as to why some people do believe that they can. I think when we look at the reality of it, with PPC, there is a kind of steep learning curve. So it's not just about, you know, setting a campaign live and letting it run. I think there's a lot behind it. You know, A/B testing, understanding all the different bidding strategies, and kind of just understanding how PPC works in general. And obviously without expertise and those kind of things, they can lead to a lot of wasted ad spend. So it could be that they're, you know, focusing on ineffective keywords. They're not kind of really getting that strategy behind it. Another thing is kind of the constantly evolving landscape of PPC. I know everyone will probably realize that there's like updates nearly every week these days. So it's really hard to kind of keep on top of what's changing, what works and what doesn't. As well as like competitive pressure. So in a lot of industries, there'll be a lot of competition. So there's a lot more to it than just kind of press and go. You know, you've got to kind of understand what a competitor's doing, how can we be strategic to kind of get those quick wins. And then again, just lack of advanced strategies. So agencies obviously work alongside a lot of different clients, so they'll get different skill sets that they can utilize. And obviously, if you're working in-house and you're just working on one brand, sometimes you can kind of miss the bigger picture and you're kind of focusing on what works. Whereas actually there could be like other strategies that you could use that can obviously boost the performance of the campaign. So I think there's kind of two prongs to it. You know, obviously it does make sense as to why in-house marketers think that, you know, it is kind of easy to kind of set it up. It is really accessible. I think, but it's just that more complex strategy aspect that potentially could be missing.
Perfect. Thank you, Anna. Right, going on nicely to the kind of challenges section. Samantha, we'll start with yourself for this. How can brands manage rising CPCs and stay competitive without overspending?
I think a lot of it comes down to research, whether that's research before the campaign goes live or when you've got a bit of data behind it. So things like Google's Keyword Planner are really helpful for giving you an approximate cost per click before you set up a campaign. And right off the bat there, you can see if there are any really particularly expensive keywords before you sort of blow big chunks of budget on them. We did some keyword research for a client recently in commercial law, and there was a keyword which is about £55 per click at a low bid, which is one of the highest I've ever seen. And at that point, you can start to think, okay, well, maybe we need to think about excluding keywords before we get started. Obviously, once you're up and running as well, then you've got numbers. You can start to see, you know, a particular keyword might be spending huge chunks of budget, but actually you're getting sort of low returns on it. So making sure you're optimizing things once you've actually got started. I think as well, one thing that's quite important to think, and sometimes people miss, is going beyond the click. So the cost per click is one element, but obviously when people click on your advert, you want them to do something, whether that's a sale on the website, whether it's a lead generation. If you have a keyword which is a particularly high cost per click, but it converts 100%, gives you a really good return on ad spend, then actually you might be happy paying that cost. If you've got a keyword which is low cost per click, on the surface it can look fantastic, but if that keyword never converts and people get through to the website, actually maybe that's something you want to think about excluding, because potentially that's wasting budget for you as well. I think as well, one of the things that's definitely worth looking at with Google Ads especially, but it works on social, works on Bing, whichever channel you're using, is excluding kind of those non-performers. So if you have an audience or you have a demographic or you have a location, London particularly, if you're running a UK-wide campaign, we find if you're targeting London, then the cost per click generally is a lot higher. So you might think, okay, certain locations will run a bid adjustment because we want to pay a little bit less, or maybe we'll exclude locations entirely if there's somewhere that's taking a huge chunk of budget, but we're just not seeing those returns. So there's some of that elements you can do before the campaign goes live, but I think once you've got the campaign, you've got the data behind it, then start having a look at, okay, where can we save money? Where are we potentially wasting budget? Where can we make the most of that spend?
Thank you, Samantha. George, from your side now, what strategies help businesses navigate frequent platform algorithm updates?
Yeah, Anna kind of already touched on regular changes and updates which are going on. I think the first thing is being aware of them. So, you know, simple things like Google Alerts to your emails can help you keep up to date from blogs and things like that. So you're actually fully aware of what is changing, as well as keeping in touch with platform reps in case there's new betas and things like that, which can often set the direction which they might be looking to go in and can potentially help you get ahead of the curve or competitors if you can get into that first. I think in terms of algorithm updates with PPC, it's rarely immediate changes versus something like SEO, where you'll have a different way that Google will, you know, rank your content. For PPC, it's unlikely to change just in a day. But I think the most important thing is to understand your benchmarks and always just keep looking at the bigger picture rather than just the data in isolation. So looking for trends rather than anomalies in your accounts. There might be some fluctuations at a minimum, but obviously you don't want to make snap decisions on that if it's just a small change. And whether, you know, it is going to be something which comes around quickly, or if it's something you've got time to prepare and lay out proper tests for, I think is also going to be part of it as well. So yeah, testing is going to be a big part of it if it's something like a bid strategy update. So know what timelines you're working to, set the expectations, what you want to get out of it, build in a grace period for getting enough data. And I think validate as much as possible with internal client data wherever you can. So the platforms might say one thing, but the internal data may say something else. So we need to make sure that we're using that as our source of truth as much as possible. And then I think looking beyond just what is happening on PPC as well. So you're looking at your Google Analytics at other sources. Is it a change which has happened just in your account, or actually is it a site-wide issue impacting the client and it's not the result of just this one thing which you know maybe thought it was? And I think one of the big ones is modern platforms require a lot of data these days to optimize effectively. So if you're a lead gen business and you've got multiple different stages in your conversion funnel, you're going to have to pick a point in the middle that gives you enough quality with enough volume at the same time. You can't go straight to the bottom of the funnel and hope that it's going to work. So if it is a platform change where you're struggling to get enough data through the account and suddenly your bid strategies aren't working, you might have to think about shifting slightly higher up and again validating it with the internal data as well. One thing, it's quite small. There's a really handy notes feature in something like Google Ads where if there is a change and you know what data happened, just logging that on the timeline is really handy when you have to go back and look in 6 months and wonder what changed without trawling through the change history and other things like that. So small feature, but very handy.
Perfect. Thank you, George. Abby, from your point of view, what's the biggest PPC challenge for smaller brands and how can they overcome it?
So I think oftentimes smaller brands can be maybe tempted to go in kind of all guns blazing, trying to compete with larger brands on perhaps more limited budgets, but obviously that's going to be really challenging and is not likely to allow you to achieve your goals as a smaller brand. So I think for this, I'd recommend focusing more on targeting a niche. So making sure you're adding those kind of exact match versions of your most important niche keywords. So you're not kind of throwing loads of budget on really broad keywords where that competition is really high. And then also getting a really robust audience strategy. So again, making sure you're being efficient with the people that you're targeting. You know who your customer is and really build that audience strategy out so you're getting the most again out of that perhaps limited budget. And then finally, I think getting the attribution and conversion tracking right as well. So we'll find that maybe smaller brands don't have the right team or resources to get this set up properly. But I think if there's one thing that I'd recommend that you really invest in as a smaller brand is getting that watertight conversion tracking set up, because data is going to be so important for determining, you know, where you can grow and where you can invest that budget in. Yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Right, thank you, Abby. And George, just to follow up on that, how would you say you balance short-term wins in PPC with long-term brand building goals?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it always needs to tie back to kind of the KPI and the objectives of exactly what you're going after. And it ties in some testing points as well. We kind of try and work quite closely with organic teams to understand if, if it's a brand query, do you actually need to be there? If it's a generic query, how competitive is it, and things like that as well. So PPC is often not traditionally kind of brand building or upper funnel. It can be used in that way if you're going after more kind of informational queries, but you're not going to see the direct return off the back of it. But if you have good measurement and attribution tracking set up, then you might see something. But it's more where you're going to leverage other opportunities like demand gen or YouTube going further up the funnel as well, rather than just direct search.
Perfect, thank you, George. Right, moving on, and everything's moving back to exactly the pace that we want it to, so that's perfect. Going on to the best practices section. Sophie, we'll start with you on this section. What elements are key to creating PPC ads and landing pages that convert?
Yeah, it's a big question. It's a big question. I want to shy away from the "it depends" answer because I'm trying to be professional. So I think landing page wise, I think something that I think is coming to light a lot more recently is that you can have multiple different landing pages for the same thing, right? So for example, I mean, and again, kind of focusing on the intent and the traffic source as well. So if, like George mentioned earlier, if there's that kind of higher funnel informational things that you're using search for, you don't necessarily want a really short page with, a CTA right at the top, because that's not kind of the user journey that person's looking for. So it definitely does depend based on traffic sources and the intent of the keywords. I think the ultimate thing, and this applies to all kind of landing page optimization, is making sure that your landing pages are really clear and really clearly guide the user to the action or the actions that you want them to take. So whether that's, watching a video or adding something to cart or, whatever that kind of conversion action is, it's just really important that that's super clear. And then I think when we're talking about, search ads in particular and creating effective ads, and this is kind of off the back of what Abby mentioned earlier, there are those factors that aren't always super visible, but are really, really important. So ad rank, for example. For anyone that doesn't know, ad rank, it's the metric that helps you at auction time. It should help you at auction time, but it calculates whether or not your ad will show at all, and if it does, at what position it will show. And two of the factors that come towards that contribute towards ad rank calculations are your expected click-through rate, so how likely that person is to click your ad, and again, that relevance, so how relevant are your landing page, your keyword, and your ad copy. And I think that's something that gets missed sometimes. I think, again, as Anna was kind of mentioning earlier, Google does make it very easy to create campaigns, but it's that strategic element that's really important too. So I think ultimately it's the key really is the relevance between landing page, ad copy, and your keywords, and then just making sure that once someone lands on the landing page, that it's really key and really clear what action you want them to take.
Thank you, Sophie. George, from your side, how important is A/B testing, and how should it be approached in PPC campaigns?
Yeah, really important. It's already been mentioned a couple of times just in reference to the other questions, so it's definitely a key factor. I think it's how accounts incrementally improve over time. So you can get your foundations there. You can get what you think it should be from the start if it's a brand new account, but the way you improve it over time is by continually testing. And there's lots of different avenues that you can test, and that's going to change between different channels as well. So your search test is going to be different to what you're testing on Meta, for example. So I think what is important is to have a plan of what you actually want to do. So testing coherently with a purpose to actually find an answer to a hypothesis, and not just testing for the sake of it. Changing one word in a headline is not going to be a significant shift or really help you out very much. But if you're using different behavioral biases in your ad copy, so does social proofing work better than something like authority bias of your reviews or rankings and things like that? That's a test that you might want to find out in case it's more important to your customer. So planning ahead and having a selection of tests that you actually want to run that's going to potentially make an impact is really important. But you need to prioritize what you're doing. You don't want to be running 3 different tests at once, because you're not going to get proper results off the back of it. And you kind of need to understand what you want to get out of it as well. So if you're testing a landing page to improve conversion, that should be your primary KPI. There might be a couple of secondary ones, such as the landing page experience, like Sophie just mentioned, and a quality score, but that's not specifically what you're testing. Versus if you're testing a different creative on Meta, you're probably looking to improve your click-through rate as a result of that. It might not impact your conversion rate because the landing page hasn't changed. So it's just understanding what you're running and what you're expecting to get out of it, and not jumping to conclusions on things which maybe aren't relevant either. So yeah, don't try and test everything all at once, and make sure that when you're doing it, it's in a stable period of time. Don't try and test something in maybe a peak period, because your results are not going to be consistent with your benchmark. So you need to know where you're starting from. You need to have a good timeline. And I was kind of mentioned earlier, having a grace period. Sometimes it can take, 2 weeks, 4 weeks for data to go back into the platform. So if you finish your test and you get your results and you say it didn't work, actually you might be judging it a little bit too early. I think.
Thank you, John. Oh, sorry.
One other important point is, even if a test doesn't go well, it doesn't mean it was a bad test. You still learned something off the back of it. So it might be you reiterate on that test and you try a different version of it because there's potential there, or you move on to the next test and you say, okay, that didn't work, what else can we try? So there's loads of different options, and there's lots and lots you can do. I think just having a good plan, having good enough data to measure it, so give it enough time and make it fair.
Thank you, George. Samantha, from your side, are there any cost-effective strategies for achieving significant results without a large spend?
Yeah, I think the main one on this front, I think, comes back to what Sophie was saying around conversion rate optimization, and making sure that where you're sending people when they've clicked on those adverts is the best match for them. Because you can have fantastic ad copy, ad creative, really great keyword matching, but if you send people to a terrible website or a non-functional app, then the sale, the lead, whatever ultimately it is you want people to do is lost, and then ultimately that's going to be wasted ad spend, because you're paying for those clicks. So it's definitely a case of making sure that the ad copy, the ad creative, the audience targeting, you put the fantastic ad in front of the right people at the right time, you'll get the click, but just making sure that beyond that, you've made it as easy as possible for people to do ultimately what it is you want them to do. And I think kind of following on from that as well, it's sometimes with a low budget, it's worth thinking about really hyper targeted campaigns. So single keyword ad groups are a little bit more old school when things were more manual, and they are quite labor intensive. But when you have a campaign, which is targeting one very specific keyword, you can make sure that the ad copy that you're showing for that search query is exactly correct. If you then have the right landing page, you've got that user journey all tied up, and that's where the conversion rate is much higher. I think it can be tempting for people to think, as people on the panel have alluded to, that people think they need to go after the high search volume. So everybody's searching for this top of the funnel, high volume keyword. Let's go after that. Send it to a generic landing page on the website that already exists. You'll get some results from that, but you probably won't get the best results. And when you're trying to make the most of either limited budget, or you're trying to get the best returns for as low a spend as possible, that's where hyper targeting really, really comes into play. And I think as well, feeding on from that, following on from something that Abby was saying about conversions and making sure that you've got that conversion watertight. When you're looking at making the most of the budget, the data is going to tell you where to spend the budget, where to double down on keywords or ad strategies that are winning, when to perhaps turn some off because they're not working. And ultimately, the only way you're going to know that is if you have that sort of end-to-end user journey where you can see the click, the conversion. If it's e-commerce, where you can see the revenue, so you've got your return on ad spend in there as well. So it's really key before you get started, or quite quickly after you've got started, you make sure that conversion journey, the user journey, or that tracking where possible is as tied down as it can be.
Okay, thanks, Samantha. Anna, the next question for yourself. What's the best approach to aligning PPC efforts with overall business goals?
Yeah, so I think with this one, it's kind of like you have to look at it from, instead of just looking at it from a marketing perspective. So obviously I know marketing teams will have marketing goals that they're kind of looking at. So it could be like the amount of conversions that they're getting, or is the click-through rate going up? But it's actually about taking a step back and kind of having a look at what is the business owner's goal. So like what is actually the goal of the whole business rather than just kind of honing down on marketing specifically. So I think there's two different ways of looking at it. So from a lead generation perspective, what I would say is the best thing to do is to implement offline conversions. So this is basically a way of tracking which basically will track. So if someone fills in a form on the website, it basically tracks that lead offline to go on to see if that actually went on to be a sale for the business or not. And then you can import that data back into Google Ads. And then you can kind of try to teach the algorithms towards the data that's actually valuable to the business. Because I think a lot of people get bogged down in, just tracking conversions, how many leads did we get? But actually, if half of those leads didn't actually contribute anything towards the business, then we're kind of still teaching the algorithms these are valuable to the business when actually they're not. So I think from a lead generation perspective, I think definitely getting offline conversions is key, just to aligning things with business goals, because then you're kind of teaching the algorithms, actually, we only want to focus on this half of the conversions that we got because these are the ones that actually went on to generate tangible business value. I think from a e-commerce perspective, so actually looking at what is important. So if you've got a wide range of products and say they've all got different margins, then having a look at actually structuring the account based on those things that are important to the business. So I think, Google tries to push this, consolidate, get everything together and, push all the data together. But actually, that's not aligning with your specific unique business goals. So I think, really understanding, is it just revenue growth and everything's got the same margin? Then obviously you want to kind of push for just generating as much value as possible. So you want to understand, and segment out. So for example, if you've got products that range from like £20 to £500, those people that will be spending £500 are going to be completely different. They're going to have different behaviors, different intents to the people that are spending £20. So you want to kind of segment out data that's important, just to kind of give the algorithms a lot to work with, and kind of consolidating data, but in a way that's relevant for your business. So I think definitely just kind of understanding firstly what those business goals are, and then kind of understanding exactly how you can structure your account to align with that is kind of key there.
Perfect. Thank you, Anna. Sophie, just to follow up with yourself, what role does creative messaging play in the success of PPC campaigns, and how can brands improve it?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the time across both search and social generally, we are very limited by character counts, pixel length, screen sizes, just the snippet of information that people can see. But the ad creative is the most important thing at that moment, because it's the thing that encourages action, whether that's a click, conversion, whatever that is. So I think it is really important. I think it's very easy to underestimate the impact of creative ad copy, good ad copy that works. I think from that, going back to kind of one of the questions I answered earlier, while creative messaging and exciting messaging is really important, you still want to focus on that relevance. So there's definitely a balancing act there, making sure that your ad copy is relevant to your keywords and your landing page, but also is creative enough and exciting enough for someone to kind of click through and take that action. I think in terms of how we improve that messaging, again, until we have data, it is tricky, and I really try and encourage everyone to use data-driven decision making rather than gut feel, vibe, how you're feeling that day. So I think that's the most important thing, is start with something and then test and see what that looks like, and look at your particularly on Google Ads, look at your asset report, see which headlines encourage clicks and conversions, which descriptions encourage clicks and conversions, and go from there. I think if you see an ad underperforming, maybe not hitting the kind of base CTR or like any benchmarks that you've got, instead of kind of throwing out the whole thing, I think it is important to go back and be a little more granular. So if you're seeing just maybe one or two headlines are low performing and kind of dragging performance down, update those first rather than scrapping the whole thing, because there's a lot of copy that goes into ads these days. So I think those sorts of things, like relying on the metrics, looking at CTR, conversion rate, if that's something that's important, and conversions, using those metrics and that data to inform those decisions can really help you improve any of your ad copy.
Perfect. Thank you, Sophie. Right, we've got 2 sections remaining going through. We're going to touch on budgets and then going on to measuring success. If there are any questions from the audience that they want to get involved in the chat, feel free. We're probably going to have like about 5 to 7 minutes at the end, kind of go through them. John's already asked a question, so I'll get around to that, John, hopefully when we've got through the last 2 sections. So if there are any kind of burning questions that you want to ask our panel, feel free to add them in the chat, and I'll hopefully get around to them at the end. Right, budgets. Anna, we'll start with yourself for this section. How do you determine the right budget for PPC campaigns, especially for smaller businesses?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of, you have to look at firstly what the goal is. So are you kind of looking for brand awareness? Are you looking for sales growth? Are you looking to generate leads? I think that's kind of the most important thing first, to understanding kind of what budget is kind of right. Because I think a lot of people sometimes just like, I don't know, I just want to kind of, do Google Ads, and it's kind of like, okay, but, we need to understand exactly what we're aiming to do first. I think definitely key, and I know this sounds a bit basic, but Keyword Planner is going to be your best friend. I think that's where we do a lot of our projections from. It's kind of where you can understand the search volume, you can understand how much you're going to have to pay for those clicks. And I think that's kind of where you should get the basis of how much, or a ballpark of how much you should be spending. Obviously, depending on kind of what industry you're in, so you could be in, as I know Samantha was saying earlier about some industries that have really high cost per clicks, and if that's kind of not feasible, and maybe you're a smaller business and you're against some really big players who have kind of like unlimited budget, then it's kind of about understanding, prioritizing high intent keywords, but also focusing on like longer tail but high intent keywords. So I think, there are some kind of keywords that are still relevant and kind of exactly what you're trying to aim for, but there'll be less volume and they'll be a lot cheaper because less people are bidding on it. So I think that's a good strategy to go with as well, especially in those kind of industries that are really expensive, or they've got really high search volume. Because I think the other thing to be mindful of is if you're targeting keywords and you're like, oh amazing, there's so much search volume for this, you've also got to kind of understand from the other side that actually that means that your ad could be clicked on that many times, which obviously can burn through a lot of budget. So I think it's about kind of having a bit of a ballpark of what you can afford to spend. And obviously you can scale up or you can scale down, but I think that first month is a good one to test, because again, if you've got no data, you're going to have to spend a little bit of money to just kind of test. Obviously while you're going through that learning period. But I think the main thing is just kind of prioritizing those keywords that are important to the business. Try to kind of not go for, really generic keywords, because that's again where you're going to kind of burn through budget and you're not going to really get an understanding of the market and kind of what Google Ads can do for you. So I would always kind of say start at the bottom and kind of work your way up. So when you're scaling, if you kind of find something that works, obviously you want to put budget into that. If you're kind of finding things that don't work, again, you can kind of pause those campaigns and refine it from there. So I think it's just about kind of getting those good foundational keywords and then kind of scaling gradually. Obviously you'll kind of get a feel for how many people are clicking, how much you're going to kind of spend, and kind of you can take it from there in terms of growing, or if things are not working, kind of bringing it back and focusing on the keywords that are really performing well.
Thank you, Anna. Samantha, what mistakes should brands avoid when starting or scaling their PPC efforts?
So there's quite a few, as you can imagine. I'll try and keep it to the main ones. There's a lot of potential pitfalls, obviously, when you're setting up a paid media campaign, and then if you make a mistake at the beginning, when you scale, obviously that becomes more pronounced. So it's something that Ben touched on quite early on in the session. I think the key thing I'd recommend, especially at the moment, is taking Google, Meta, whichever platform you're working with, taking their recommendations with a pinch of salt. A lot of platforms have these tools which they put in front of you, especially when you're setting up campaigns that say, let us choose your targeting, let us pick your keywords, leave your bidding to our AI. And it's a really good way to spend a lot of money and not really get a lot of results, because I think the key thing is, at the end of the day, Google, Meta, they are businesses and their goal is to make themselves money. And sometimes that can come at the expense of customers, and when people say, you know, turn on broad match, up your budgets, things like that. So there are some tools which can be useful. So things like smart bidding, automation, your real-time bidding in these auctions can work very well. But I would say straight off the bat, be very careful when taking any of the platforms optimization recommendations. Some of them can be useful, but some of them can be a good way just to spend a lot of your money. And touching on something that George mentioned as well is if you do put any experiments in place, so if there's a recommendation you think, yeah, I want to give that a go, that could be suitable for my business, making sure you run these experiments or making sure you make these changes one at a time, because I have seen accounts where somebody's been on the phone to a Google rep and they've said, change this, change that, change the other. They've gone ahead and done it. And then we've had a call from them when we're trying to then unpick all the damage that's been done to this account. And when you've got a lot of different elements at play, it's hard to tell sometimes which one kind of caused the problem, if they all cause the problem, how you kind of row back from that. So I think, yeah, anytime you see an automated recommendation from one of the platforms, be very cautious before applying it, and certainly give it some consideration. I think as well, and then coming back to something Anna talked about with things like return on ad spend, I think as well, when you get started with a campaign, or especially when you're expanding them, it's really important to make sure you're focusing on the right metrics. So one of the things that I've seen recently is a campaign that was targeting a return on ad spend for e-commerce. So for every PPC budget that was spent, the return needed to be X in order to make a profit. The problem you have is the clients' products they were selling had very different profit margins. So you had some which were making a couple of pounds and some which were hundreds of pounds profit. And you can't bid on them. You can't treat those conversions in the same way because one conversion is not equal to another. So I think it's really important to be as granular as you can and make sure you're looking at that finer detail data. And again, I think someone else mentioned as well is talking to the client when we talk about leads. And I think that's especially important for B2B because Google, Meta, whichever platform you're using, can see a conversion in terms of a lead generation form potentially that's been submitted. But if they're all, they're getting hundreds of leads through, but it's the wrong kind of business or it's the wrong kind of inquiry, actually, it looks like a conversion. And in your Google ads, your metrics look fantastic because your conversion rate's great, your cost per click is nice and low, your cost per conversion is low. But actually, the client's telling you, well, these aren't the right leads. So actually, we've spent all this money, but we've got nothing at the end of it, really, despite what Google will tell you. So I think it's being really clear about those KPIs, really clear about those conversions, and making sure you've got the whole picture rather than just looking at the numbers, because it can be tempting to look at Google ads and say, fantastic conversion rate, scale up that campaign. But actually, if you speak to the client, they'll say, well, no, we're getting a lot of spam inquiry forms and things like that. And that's especially something we see with PMAX as well. It can get into a bit of a pattern where it will start to get what we call junk conversions or bad leads. It will think it's doing a fantastic job and try and get more of those. And that's where you need to intervene and say, no, these are not the right kinds of leads. Here's the kind of leads we're after. And that's where that first party data comes in really handy, I think, as well. The last one I would probably mention, I think that's something that's quite important, and I know a few people have touched on it, is negative keywords. So if you are running a campaign, one of the first things we'll do is add a negative keyword list. So we don't want to be placing for people looking for jobs, people looking for careers, looking for the salary of an industry, things like that. So before you get started, you can have some very clear negatives in place to say, we don't want to pay for clicks for this particular search term, or we don't want to pay for clicks in this particular location, because think about law firms. A lot of law firms you work with don't work in Scotland because of some differences in law, especially like residential. So we need to exclude certain locations if we're targeting the UK as a whole. So it's making sure that those negative targets are in place before the campaign gets started. And then once you start to scale up, making sure that they're correct before you then start putting more budget to it. Because if you're spending a lot of budget on irrelevant searches at point A, if you scale that up at point B, it's just going to be that same issue times by 10. So making sure that's really nailed down before you start scaling anything from there.
Okay. Thanks, Samantha. Ben, from your side, what's the best way to allocate budget across different PPC platforms to maximize ROI?
Yeah, so going back to and tying it into what Anna mentioned, I suppose it all depends on your business goals, audience behavior, and more importantly, historical performance. Essentially, you'll see from a lot of the questions here that historical data and performance here is key. But more importantly, if you don't have historical performance, like Anna mentioned, you've got to start from what you know works and then scale up gradually, essentially. With ROI being the priority, it's best to focus on sort of intent-driving channels like search and shopping, if you're eligible to serve ads across it, as they capture sort of users actively in market, and they should take essentially the lion's share of the budget, because you know that those channels are going to drive value for your business. AI-driven campaigns like Performance Max, as we've touched on, and automated bidding can optimize in real time, but they still need guidance to prevent wasted ad spend. With Google in the past couple of weeks as well, rolling out some new optimization insights, sort of opening that black box a little bit of PMax has helped us out generally as experts this year, so we can sort of implement certain strategies and optimization and features on top of that AI sort of led campaign type, in order to sort of gain that advantage and gain that control, which historically, since they introduced PMax, is something that we've not been able to do. Now that these sort of lower funnel services are great for immediate conversions, which is amazing. Like I've mentioned previously, we shouldn't forget sort of the impact of sort of mid to high funnel channels like social display and YouTube, etc. We need to know how they play in creating new opportunities and reaching a new target audience across a different platform potentially. So it's not about just focusing on what works, it's about thinking of the long-term picture as well for your brand. Essentially, we know that historical data should shape budget allocation, but there's no one-size-fits-all approach. Everything is going to be tied into what is working currently for your business, and that scalability approach, like I mentioned earlier. The key essentially is to stay as flexible as possible, and don't be afraid by shifting budgets across campaigns, channels, and basically keywords and ad copy that are performing really well for you at the moment. And tying it into something that George mentioned earlier, which is a regular sort of theme of this panel, is A/B testing. Testing is sort of imperative to how we optimize performance for all of our clients moving forward. If we don't test and push what's working, then essentially you're going to be left behind.
Thanks, Ben. And sticking with yourself, actually, when we go straight through to the kind of measuring success subject, what metrics matter most in PPC, and how should they influence campaign decisions?
Yeah, again, tying it into what Abby mentioned earlier, a few of these metrics have been mentioned already. I mean, the right metrics of your for your campaign goals essentially go beyond the vanity metrics. So there's so many metrics within Google in particular that it can get confusing to understand how they are sort of influencing each other. If we break it down into sort of three categories, you've got your engagement metrics, where you need to ask yourself, are customers engaging with your ads? These would be in metrics like your click-through rate. Generally, a good sign of ad relevance. A low click-through rate generally means that this would lead to you needing to optimize your creative, or consider the type of keywords that you're sort of targeting with those creatives as well. Another metric to consider would be conversion rate. For example, if traffic is high but conversions are low, then you need to have an idea of how your landing pages are performing, in order to get an idea of how that relays to your keyword and to your ad copy as well. So it's a clear definition between keyword, ad copy, and landing page, making sure that generally you're sending people to the right landing page to make an effective action on the site. From the second point would be from an efficiency and optimization metric, you sort of need to ask yourself, are you maximizing reach as effectively as possible? So these would be metrics like impression share. These help you understand sort of your headroom opportunity across certain keywords, and whether you are limited by budget or bids in that category as well. And then another metric within this sector as well would be quality score, as we mentioned earlier. This affects your CPCs and overall ad efficiency, whereby essentially you need to optimize your ad copy and landing pages in order to get the best quality score possible and the most and cheapest CPC possible for your client, essentially. So it's just to monitor and manage your wasted ad spend and limit that impact of that as well. And then finally, it all ties into obviously your performance goals, which would be your performance metrics, where you need to ask yourself, are you getting the right results? Are you hitting targets? So one of these would be ROAS, return on ad spend, or for lead gen clients, it will be cost per acquisition. If these campaigns aren't hitting targets, then you just need to have a look at consider adjusting bids, targeting, or creative influence alongside the previous two levels. So essentially all of these sort of levels tie into influence in your performance metrics. So you just need to remember that no metric works in isolation. Each one can impact another, but the ones highlighted above are sort of key in driving success if managed correctly.
Thank you, Ben. Much appreciated. Abby, from your side, how often should brands evaluate and optimize their PPC campaigns?
I think you can definitely overdo optimizing. Obviously, especially in the age of smart bidding. I've not been in PPC as long as some of the others on the call, but I do still remember a time when we were kind of changing individual keyword CPCs on a day-to-day basis, and that just kind of doesn't happen anymore with smart bidding. And I am an advocate for smart bidding. I think as long as you're able to have that human input and human kind of optimizations in it, it can do quite well. But yeah, if you are using smart bidding, you do need to give your campaigns time to learn and perform before evaluating that success or making changes. My pod has gone, yeah, the light turned off, sorry. Yeah, working in an agency setting, kind of the first question I'll get from my clients is, when am I going to see success? When am I going to see some results? And I don't think there's a one size fits all, but there are some indicators that can help you to determine when you're going to see those results and when you should be optimizing. So Google kind of recommend 1 to 2 conversion cycles, and obviously this will be different for everybody. If you have a longer conversion cycle or a longer kind of click to buy cycle, it's going to take longer for you to evaluate that success than a business that has a very short one. So yeah, 1 to 2 kind of conversion cycles before you really start evaluating that performance, and changing and testing too frequently can actually cause volatility, it's particularly with smart bidding. So, you know, keeping an eye on it on a weekly and a regular basis, but also setting realistic expectations around when you're going to wrap up that campaign, and giving it enough time to have that success. And yeah, when you're making a big change as well, like I say, you're probably going to see some volatility. So allow it to settle before you really evaluate whether that change was a success.
Thanks, Abby. Sophie, from your side, what's the role of qualitative feedback, like customer insights, in measuring PPC success?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because although we should all be data-driven, ideally, again, there is often a much bigger story behind that. And I think, as everyone's kind of mentioned so far, you know, the platforms will show you that you're getting conversions, but whether they're of a high quality or a low quality, we don't have that. So I think customer insights, when we have access to them, are absolutely invaluable. I think as well, I mean, as anyone who works for a business, but particularly as marketers who tend to know the products and services that we're selling pretty in depth, I think sometimes we can take our knowledge for granted. And again, this is, you know, something that I think a lot of people experience. But sometimes we'll create ad copy that, again, we think is really good, we think is going to work really well, but there are those nuances and those differences in understanding and differences in intent that I think we really need to take into account too. So again, although CTR might be strong or it might be weak, we don't always have that key insight to why that is. So I think, yeah, anytime we can get data from people clicking our ads, people that turn into customers and things like that, I think is absolutely invaluable. Sometimes we have to take it with a little bit of a pinch of salt, but I think a lot of the time you can get some really, really great insights to help improve performance quite quickly.
Good. Thank you, Sophie. And George, on to the final question. How can businesses use data to continuously improve their PPC campaigns and predict future performance?
Yeah, our try and be brief to finish up, because I think this has been a pretty common thread throughout all of this and is pretty essential to any modern digital advertising or otherwise. So yeah, you need the right data to feed the machines and the optimization. Within platforms, that's just step one of get the measurement and everything else right. Tell it what you want it to do. Make sure you've got enough coming into it to optimize. We're already mentioning continual testing based on that data as well. So what do you actually want to get out of it? How do you improve it and make those incremental gains? I already touched on it earlier, but getting close to client data is essential as well. So actually validating everything you're doing with what they're seeing on their side, getting feedback from them. And in terms of predicting future performance, so it's trickier with sort of B2B businesses if you've got a 6-month, 9-month lead time before purchase. So understanding what the impact or predicted value is going to be, you've got to choose a point that you're measuring your campaign success on, but also business success might come later. So we get really close to client data and look at pipeline value and when that's expected to close based on their CRM data. So we know that there can be really big outlier revenue drivers which come from one lead, but shifts you totally above target when throughout the entire month you've been below target. So we know that we need to account for that, not make snap decisions based on just the immediate data, but to understand what is likely going to happen, how their sales team operates. Are they going to start closing those leads at the end of a quarter because they want to hit their sales targets and things like that? There's lots of external factors beyond just the immediate data in the platform. But as much as you can, feeding that back in is always going to be really valuable. So it's the data will be at the heart of everything we should be doing at this point.
Thank you, George. Thank you. And we're pretty much there. To be honest, 3 minutes to go. We've run perfectly on time. I won't get a chance to go through all the questions, unfortunately, guys. We've had questions from John, Charles, and Graham. We will follow up with all of you following this call, and we'll share resources from everybody. John, we might have time quickly for your first question. If anyone wants to pick this up, if ad strength doesn't rank you enough, does increasing bid help override lower rank? Who would like to answer that?
I could answer. Yeah.
So it can, but I wouldn't recommend it, basically. I think, and not all the time either. That's not a consistent way to do it. I think, especially now, because we as advertisers don't generally have control of those CPC bids anymore. It's not as much of a factor, like particularly if we're using smart bidding. Smart bidding does the work by automatically getting like the perfect bid for each auction based on a lot of things that we will never know and that we don't have access to. So I think historically as well, that's something that people would try and do. But I think ultimately ad rank the thing that we should focus on wherever possible when we don't have as much control of those bid caps.
Anyone else want to touch on it?
I was just going to kind of agree, you need to have a bit of a mix. You can't just kind of completely disregard ad rank. Definitely have a mix if you can.
Perfect. Right, well, we are just about to go 1 minute to 10, so we can finish and close just now. Thank you to everybody, Anna, Samantha, Sophie, George, Abby, Ben. It's been a great panel. Thank you very much for the workshop. It's been fantastic. Thank you for the audience and thank you for your questions. Sorry we didn't get around to all of them. We will follow up. We will be sharing the resources. So yeah, thank you very much, guys, and have a great day.